The Mothman Mystery. Introduction. In November of 1966, something happened in a small town that should not have happened at all. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. A quiet place, predictable, the kind of town where people know their neighbors, wave at passing cars, and lock their doors out of habit, not fear. Nothing unusual happens here. At least, nothing is supposed to. Until one night, something broke that pattern. 4 people were driving late at night. Windows cracked slightly, radio low, the road ahead empty. Normal, routine, forgettable. And then, something appeared that would make that night impossible to forget. What they saw would follow them, not just down the road, but for the rest of their lives. They described something tall, too tall, something with wings, too wide, something with glowing red eyes, too aware. And whatever it was, it kept up with their car at nearly 100 miles per hour. No sound. Linda later said she didn't want to look back again, but she did, because not looking somehow felt worse. No struggle, just there. Within days, the story spread. Within weeks, more sightings followed. And just over a year later, a bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. And that's when the question changed. Was it coincidence? Was it misidentification? Or did something appear before the disaster? Watching, waiting, maybe even knowing. Because unlike ancient legends whispered over centuries, this didn't come from myth. It came from police reports, from newspapers, from people who had no reason to lie, and every reason to wish they were wrong. This is not just a story about a creature. It is a story about perception, fear, memory, and what happens when reality stops behaving the way we expect it to. The place where reality starts to break. To understand what people saw, you have to understand where they were standing when they saw it. Point Pleasant sits at the meeting point of 2 rivers. By day, it feels calm, almost too calm. Flat water, open sky, long stretches of nothing happening. But just outside of town, there's a place that doesn't feel like it belongs. The TNT area, an abandoned World War II munitions site. Concrete bunkers sit half-sunken into the earth, metal doors rusted shut, or hanging open just enough to suggest something once moved through them. Paths twist through the trees, but they don't feel like trails. They feel like remnants. And the ground itself doesn't stay dry. Water collects in shallow basins, reflecting the sky in broken, distorted fragments. During the day, it's unsettling. At night, it's disorienting. Light disappears faster than expected. Shadows don't just stretch, they merge, blur, and swallow detail. Sound behaves strangely. A branch snapping in the distance can feel like it's right behind you. A breeze can carry movement you can't quite locate. And in that environment, your brain starts working differently, because the brain isn't designed to tolerate uncertainty. It fills it, quickly, aggressively, and sometimes incorrectly. A shape becomes a figure, a movement becomes intention, and a shadow becomes something watching you. The night, everything changed. November 15th, 1966, approximately 11:30 p.m. Witnesses: Roger Scarberry, 18, Linda Scarberry, Steve Millett, and Mary Millett. Source documentation: statements reported in local newspapers, including the Point Pleasant Register, West Virginia newspaper, and later circulated via the Associated Press. Location: near the TNT area, just outside Point Pleasant, West Virginia, close to the old North Power Plant structure. 4 people driving through the TNT area. It's late, dark, the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything. Then, something appears, not suddenly, but enough to break the pattern your brain was relying on. And that's the moment. Everything changes. Standing near a structure. At first, it looks like a man. That's the brain doing what it always does, trying to make sense of something unfamiliar. But then, it changes. Too tall, too still, and then the eyes reflect in the headlights. Red, not glowing on their own, but reflecting light in a way that feels wrong. Then it moves, and everything shifts. The brain stops trying to understand and starts trying to survive. Police were contacted that same night, not the next day, not after thinking it over. That night. Because whatever they experienced didn't feel like something that could wait until morning. Roger later described the moment as something that didn't just scare him, but confused him first. Because fear comes after understanding. Something is wrong. This felt wrong before it made sense. The figure spreads its wings, not like a bird taking off. Slow, deliberate, controlled. The driver hits the gas. The car speeds up, 80 miles per hour, 90. And whatever this thing is, it keeps up, not gaining, not falling behind, matching them, like it's choosing to stay there. No sound, no wing beats, just movement, right behind them. Then suddenly, it's gone. And just like that, the encounter is over. But the memory isn't. Because moments like that don't fade. They lock in, sharp, detailed, and very hard to explain away. When one sighting became many. Following initial media coverage, reports of similar encounters increased in both frequency and consistency. This pattern aligns with what sociological literature describes as an informational cascade. In such cascades, early reports establish a descriptive framework. Subsequent observers, encountering ambiguous stimuli, map their experiences onto this framework, producing convergence in reported features. This process does not imply fabrication. Rather, it reflects the interaction between individual perception and collective narrative formation. Timeline, Point Pleasant, 1966 to 1967. November 15th, 1966. Initial encounter. November 16th to 20th. Multiple corroborative reports. Late November. Expansion to regional and national media. December 1966 to spring 1967. Sustained reporting period. December 15th, 1967. Silver Bridge collapse. Reporting declines. Convergent descriptors. Large winged humanoid form. Reflective or glowing eyes. Silent or near-silent movement. Vertical ascent patterns. The stabilization of these descriptors illustrates how collective perception can produce internally consistent narratives, absent centralized coordination. The disaster that changed everything. The collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1967, introduced a critical inflection point in the narrative. Despite a well-documented engineering cause, failure of a load-bearing eye bar due to corrosion and fatigue, many observers retrospectively associated prior sightings with the disaster. This reflects a cognitive process known as retrospective patterning. Following high-impact events, individuals seek antecedent signals that might impose structure or predictability on otherwise chaotic outcomes. The Mothman narrative thus transitions from descriptive to interpretive, acquiring the status of a symbolic precursor or omen. Encounters before the unthinkable. Across multiple contexts, anomalous sightings cluster around periods of instability. Below are reconstructed, scene-based accounts synthesized from recurring witness descriptions to illustrate how these experiences are reported. Case study: Point Pleasant, pre-bridge collapse, late 1966. Source context: sightings referenced in local reporting and later popularized in books such as The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. Route 62, just north of Point Pleasant, late November 1966, approximately between 10:30 p.m. and midnight. Witnesses, local residents. Names reported in various accounts include couples driving between town and the TNT area. Environment: rural highway, minimal lighting, dense tree lines, abandoned munitions, bunkers nearby. Route 62, night. The road is empty. A couple drives past the TNT area, headlights carving a narrow tunnel through darkness. As they pass an old structure, something stands just off the shoulder. At first, human. Then the eyes catch the light. Red, too high. The figure turns. Wings unfold, not with a burst, but with a deliberate, jointed motion, like something opening rather than taking off. The driver accelerates. The engine strains. There's a moment of hesitation, just enough time for the brain to question what it's seeing. Then, instinct takes over. In the rearview mirror, the shape lifts. No audible wing beats, no rush of air, just a dark form closing distance. For several seconds, longer than expected, it maintains position behind the car. Then it rises sharply, almost vertically, and disappears above the tree line. After the bridge collapse, this memory changes meaning. What was once fear becomes, retrospectively, a warning. And once a memory becomes a warning, it becomes impossible to forget. Case study: Japan, Tohoku/Fukushima, March to April 2011. Location: Tohoku region, northeastern Japan, rural foothills near affected Fukushima-adjacent zones. Time: March to April 2011, typically between 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., dusk hours. Witnesses: multiple unnamed civilians, including local residents and 2 teenage hunters, reported in online forums and anecdotal collections. Foothills outside a damaged town. Power is intermittent. Aftershocks ripple through the ground at irregular intervals. At dusk, a small group stands near a tree line, scanning the horizon for lights from aid vehicles. One person stops speaking. Above the trees, movement. A silhouette resolves against the dim sky. Broad wings, narrow body. The proportions feel wrong. Too much span for the mass beneath. It holds position briefly. No flapping. No sound. Then, vertical ascent. Not a glide. Not a climb. With forward momentum. Up. Acceleration increases as it rises, as if pulled along a straight line, into darkness. A second account. Days later. Teenage hunters at the forest edge. They raise rifles, tracking a shape that emerges from behind a ridge. Before a shot can be taken, the figure launches upward and vanishes. One witness later reports a distinct impression of being observed prior to the ascent. Common elements across reports: silent motion, brief visibility windows, vertical displacement, inconsistent with typical avian launch, heightened emotional context, aftershocks, uncertainty. Case study: Korea, Mountain Ridge Encounters, 2000s to 2010s. Location: rural mountainous regions of South Korea, reports clustered in Gangwon Province and similar forested areas. Time: early evening, 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., primarily during low-light transitions. Witnesses: independent hikers and locals, names not publicly verified, reported through regional accounts. Dusk, on a forested ridge. A hiker notices a form at the skyline. It appears stationary, then translates laterally in a single, smooth motion. No visible wing beats, no sound. The figure clears the ridge and, without a visible arc, lifts upward and disappears. In a separate report, a witness describes a shape rising from behind trees, pausing mid-air, then ascending vertically out of view. The defining feature in these accounts is not just movement, but the absence of expected aerodynamic cues. Case study: Post 9/11, retrospective accounts, 2001. Unverified recollections describe winged silhouettes near urban structures in the days preceding the attacks. A witness reports a dark form above a rooftop at dusk, wings extended, stationary for several seconds, then ascending rapidly. Another recalls a shadow moving between buildings, too large for a bird, too silent for an aircraft. These accounts are best interpreted through memory reconstruction. High-impact event leads to retrospective search for precursors. Ambiguous prior stimuli leads to reclassified as meaningful signals. The experience becomes significant after the fact, reshaped by the event it is linked to. Case study: Chicago, urban cluster, 2011 to present. Location: Chicago Riverwalk, downtown Chicago. Time: multiple reports between 2016 to 2018, typically 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. Witnesses: independent pedestrians and workers. Reports compiled by investigator Lon Strickler. Phantoms and monsters. Riverwalk at night. A pedestrian looks up and sees a shape crossing between buildings at mid-height. Wings extended. No visible flapping. No correction in motion. No sign of effort. The figure glides, then changes direction abruptly, too sharply, too precisely, as if it already knew where it was going before it moved, before ascending and disappearing into the skyline. Location: O'Hare International Airport vicinity. Time: notable reports in 2017, late night hours, approximately 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Witnesses: airport workers and nearby drivers. Multiple independent reports. Near O'Hare, a worker reports a large silhouette passing over a parking structure. Again, silence. Again, rapid vertical exit. Despite urban lighting and reduced environmental ambiguity, the core descriptors persist. Pattern synthesis. Across cases, temporal proximity to instability or heightened vigilance, emphasis on silence and smooth, controlled motion, frequent reports of vertical ascent, psychological component, sense of being observed. Interpretations diverge between environmental/cognitive convergence and a consistent external stimulus filtered through similar perceptual systems. Why the same thing is seen around the world. Reports of winged humanoid figures are not geographically isolated. Similar entities appear across multiple cultural contexts, including Japan, Korea, the United Kingdom, and urban centers in the United States. The recurrence of such forms suggests the possibility of archetypal patterning, wherein the human cognitive system generates similar symbolic structures when confronted with ambiguous or threatening stimuli. The ancient connection, before Mothman had a name. Within multiple indigenous North American traditions, aerial entities, most prominently the thunderbird, are not classified as biological organisms, but as manifestations of power, balance, and environmental agency. Across plains, Great Lakes, and Pacific Northwest traditions, thunderbird narratives encode relationships between sky, storm systems, and moral order. Key features across traditions include association with storms, lightning, and seasonal transition, enormous scale relative to human observers, appearance during periods of disruption or imbalance, function as a regulator rather than a random presence. From an interpretive standpoint, these traditions do not ask whether such beings are real in a materialist sense. Instead, they position the entity within a relational ontology, where meaning, role, and effect take precedence over physical classification. When modern witnesses describe a winged humanoid figure that appears in moments of instability and exhibits non-ordinary behavior, the comparison to thunderbird-like archetypes becomes analytically relevant. This does not imply equivalence, but it suggests that the human cognitive system may draw upon enduring symbolic templates when processing anomalous stimuli. In this framework, the Mothman can be interpreted as a contemporary instantiation of an older symbolic structure, translated into modern perceptual and cultural language. Is it something more than a creature? Some interpretations situate the Mothman within a broader category of unidentified aerial phenomena. In this model, the observed entity is not a discrete organism, but a perceptual construct generated in response to anomalous stimuli. This hypothesis accounts for both variability and consistency in reports, though it remains speculative in the absence of controlled data. What the brain does when it doesn't understand. Human cognition prioritizes rapid threat detection over precise representation. Key processes include pattern completion under uncertainty, threat amplification, memory reconstruction, social synchronization of narratives. These mechanisms provide a framework for understanding how consistent reports can emerge without requiring a single objective stimulus. Every explanation, and why none, fully work. A comprehensive evaluation of the Mothman phenomenon requires a multi-model approach. No single explanatory framework fully contains it. Each theory feels close enough to be convincing, yet never complete. And that is where the mystery deepens, because the more you examine it, the more it begins to feel less like one answer is missing, and more like something is slipping between all of them. 1. The misidentified watcher, biological theory. At its most grounded level, the Mothman may not be a monster at all. It may be something known, seen, under the worst possible conditions. A sandhill crane standing in shallow water, a barred owl turning its head in the dark, a heron lifting off just as headlights hit its eyes. In those moments, shapes distort, wings stretch wider than they should, necks compress into torsos, eyes burn red in reflected light, and for a few seconds, something ordinary becomes something impossible. But here is where the theory begins to strain. Birds make sound. They struggle when they take off. They do not follow cars at highway speed. And they do not rise straight up, as if gravity briefly stopped applying. So, while this theory explains what could be seen, it does not explain how it behaved. 2. The mind under pressure, cognitive theory. The human brain is not designed to understand everything. It is designed to survive. And when it cannot understand something quickly, it creates an answer. In darkness, the brain fills in gaps. In fear, it sharpens details that matter and invents ones that don't. A shadow becomes a figure. A movement becomes intention. A glance becomes the feeling of being watched. And once that interpretation locks in, it becomes real to the person who experienced it. But here is the unsettling part. If this is purely the mind, why do so many people, separated by time, distance, and culture, describe something so similar? 3. When stories start seeing for us, sociological theory. Once the first story spreads, it changes everything, not because people lie, but because people begin to see through it. A headline prints, man-sized bird, glowing eyes, and suddenly, the next shadow someone notices is not just a shadow. It's a possibility. Over time, the story becomes a lens, and that lens reshapes perception itself. But even here, something remains, because the earliest sightings, before the story spread, already contained the same core details, which raises the question, did the story create the sightings, or did the sightings create the story? 4. Something that shouldn't exist. Cryptozoological theory. There is another possibility, one that refuses to go away, that something real, something physical, is out there, rare, nocturnal, seen just often enough to be remembered, but never long enough to be proven. A creature adapted to darkness, to silence, to avoiding detection. But this theory carries its own weight. No bones, no feathers, no remains, no clear photographs, and a body plan that challenges everything we understand about flight. If it exists outside what we know. 5. The shape of something else. UAP theory. What if it isn't a creature at all? What if what people are seeing is something they don't have the language for? Lights appear in the sky, movement that doesn't follow known patterns, objects that accelerate, stop, and change direction instantly, and the human brain, faced with something it cannot categorize, wraps it in a shape it recognizes. Wings, a body, eyes, not because that's what it is, but because that's what we can understand. In this view, the Mothman is not a being, it is an interpretation. 6. The old pattern, archetypal theory. Long before Point Pleasant, there were stories, winged beings, sky watchers, entities that appear before storms, before change, before something breaks. The thunderbird, the owlman, figures that are not animals, but symbols. The mind, when faced with the unknown, does not create randomly. It reaches backward, into patterns it already knows, and it builds from there. So when something is seen today, it may not be new. It may be something very old, wearing a modern shape. 7. When everything intersects. Hybrid theory. The most unsettling explanation is not that one theory is correct. It's that they all are. That something ambiguous is encountered. The brain interprets it. The story spreads. Culture shapes it. Memory reinforces it. And over time, it becomes something stable. Something real enough to be remembered, but never real enough to be proven. Each theory explains a piece, but none explain the whole. And that gap is where the Mothman lives. Putting the pieces together. The Mothman phenomenon is best understood as an emergent system arising from the interaction of environmental ambiguity, perceptual processing, memory dynamics, and social reinforcement. This system produces narratives that are internally coherent and resistant to falsification, ensuring persistence over time. The Japan encounter, witnessing the impossible. Location: rural Tohoku foothills. Time: dusk into early night. Context: weeks after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami. The sky is dim, but not fully dark. The horizon holds a faint glow, where emergency lights flicker in the distance. The forest line forms, a jagged silhouette. A group stands near an open slope, voices low. Every few minutes, the ground trembles. Small aftershocks, enough to keep nerves elevated. Then conversation stops.